Wow, that sounds so fantastic and inspiring. I mean, if I didn't do poetry, I'd be running to the poetry play by now, just hearing you. This would be a great opportunity. I mean, Nyende, how about you? We've heard from Kagai and Rashida, and it's been quite fantastic. How about you? What was your turning point?
Well, unlike my colleagues Rashida and Kagai, I don't consider myself quite active in the arts anymore. Um, I got a little bit of training in performing arts from Makerere, of course, but for me, when I think of the arts, I don't even want to begin thinking about it in terms of my adult life. I want to see, um, it's not even a process. I want to see this space that I've grown up with, this space that was a no-go a no-go zone at some point when you're growing up. As a kid, I remember the weddings at the neighborhood. You know, they were always a piece of art. Introduction ceremonies are always piece of art. All these things that we grow up with. And I mean, like they say, it's just so many possibilities that the arts open. It's really up to us to tap into them and, you know, figure out what we want to do with them. Endless possibilities that we can find. I'm sorry, I can't find a turning point per se, but I feel this is something that that I've grown with. Um, Maybe what could be the turning point is how I get into the arts themselves and I begin thinking of them as not something to be enjoyed, but something that I can do more with. Um, yeah, that's I can't think of a particular turning point. That's what I can say. I'm not sure I answer your question, but that's what I can say.
It's quite understood. I think the next question I do want to throw out brings us a little closer to our topic of discussion, our topic of debate, and that's, art for refugees. Why do you think that's important? I mean, when people are faced with hunger and faced with the stark realities of life, why do you think art is important for them?
When we're thinking about this project, when we did the first pilot, um, luckily Rashida Izzy and Kagai are here, that two of the main people that helped us push it through. The idea was, one, just get these really good artists in the country, go out to the camp, give these refugees a feel of the arts, in the country. Through that, they could probably get some sort of connections with these people that are already established in the industry, in the Ugandan industry. If they get that connection to the people that are established in the industry, maybe they also get chances to access other platforms in the creative sector. But again, for me, when I was thinking about the arts and the role that it could play, now we are talking about integration of refugees. When I was in Sweden, I was looking at the amount, the push that they put in their labor market. They are always thinking, okay, if we want to integrate refugees, we have to look at the labor market. Now, I was looking at our scenario. We don't have the finances, we don't have the money, like, the way the Swedes have. We don't have this kind of money to create programs, entrepreneurship programs for refugees, to ready them for the labor market. Because their approach to integration has a lot to do with the labor market. In my mind, I thought, okay, that's one approach, but how about if you don't have the finances? How about if you don't have the resources available to you, like, the Swedes had? Then I thought the arts is probably a better option for us. And it's not just a better option for us, but then it also has so many other tributaries that we need to begin looking at. So many things connect us. The refugees, again, like the discussions I always had with my colleagues. Most of the people that come into Uganda, for example, are people that you'll find traditional connections with, cultural connections with, and it's always so easy to go into the arts, to rediscover some of these connections. So in my mind, in going for the arts, I was thinking more about integration, building relations between refugees and then the hosts to create some sort of environment where they can coexist in less tensious environment.
All right, so let's go to Rashida. Rashida, so you as the founder of the Sophie Mwanika Institute of Art for Change, I mean, we're talking about an institution that is focused towards peace building and using culture and using art. So, you know, you're already there and you use it in a different way as an actress and a stage director. That's a whole other form of art. How about you? What do you think about the importance of art to refugees? Why should they be bothered when they don't have a roof over their heads?
I think to really answer that question is that we do have to start from a point that art is like the soul. You know, if somebody asks why is the importance of art to refugees, I always ask them what's the importance of air, what's the importance of our souls, because art is not one thing. Art is part of our soul. Everybody needs art. Like just like this, the body needs food. Like the body gets hungry and you have to feed it. So the body needs art. Art is everywhere. I don't see a world without art. For example, like art is in every little thing. It's a necessity. It's something that the body needs to survive. So by answering that question, we can't separate it. Every human being needs art. Every human being thrives and survives on a certain level of consumption of art in one way, be it music, be it a beautiful piece. You can look at how God created the world. It's a big piece of art, you know. The birds make music, everything. So it's like art is our soul. I think by just saying that, I've already answered why they need art. Because they actually will find it. It's part of them, you know, it's part of us. So considering that, my goal with the Institute is really to increase the access to art to so many people. And if you look at it, especially the case of refugees is really crucial because these are people who have experienced so much. As an institute, we use art for therapy, for healing, for reconciliation. And we know that art has those abilities, you know, to make everything okay, to make just everything fine. And these people need that hope. They need to be reminded that they're humans after all. You know, once they move to their countries, then they have a new label, refugees. And often they forget that they're just human beings, that they can be happy, they can thrive, they can dance, they can laugh. And art provides this remedy, this relief, even if it's just for a moment. The ability to hope and dream. I know that as a child, I don't know if everyone went through this, I could listen to certain songs and I tell myself one day, you know, one day everything will be fine. And I was a child. And just the power of just holding on to that, just listening to the music or listening to a piece of poetry. And I tell myself one day I will break, you know, I'll break loose. And they need this hope. They need to express themselves. They need to dream. And also more deeper, they need to heal. And art has these abilities. It gives them a voice to speak, a space to heal, brings people close. We all know that right now, if I started to drum, all of us are going to stand up and start dancing. It doesn't matter what kind of drum I'm drumming. Either I'm drumming a drum from Congo, and this goes back to what Keith was saying, you know, integration and bringing people together. Because with art doesn't have boundaries. And this is really why, as an institute, we're focused on art as a tool versus entertainment. It's a tool. It's a process. It's a pathway to heal, to connect people, to create a space to discuss, you know, change policies and all these things. And this is a route that we can offer these people who are coming into our country, who have moved miles, who have lost homes, who need to reset or who need to rebuild. And this is a platform that we can offer for them to speak, to contribute, and integrate in the economy in the countries.
So let's go to Kagai. Kagai, you've heard Rashida and Yende speak, and you know they've been quite articulate about their opinions. And I want to throw the same question to you. Rashida made a reference to bringing out a drum, and I don't know if you have two left feet. But as a poet, it's poetry. Not many people appreciate it the way they would appreciate a drum or something that's been staged on a stage, a play. So what would poetry do for refugees? How important would you say it is?
My experience is that people don't appreciate poetry because they don't experience it that often, and originally, okay, not originally, but in most cases, the school-going mindset is a poem is supposed to be read and critiqued in class, and so as a product, it is already exclusive in its application, in its understanding. But when you undress, when you take off its veil, the academic veil, poetry is everyday language, and this is something that it's something that we use every day. I believe that deep down, all human beings, regardless, as long as a human being is breathing, we desire to be heard, we desire to communicate, we desire to be understood. And language and communication become very important aspects, for people to access our humanness. And so through language and gesticulations, we are able to be heard, to be understood. And a lot of conflicts on this continent or in this world as a result of people, feeling, their grievances because of, either they're not being heard or they're not being taken seriously, or just their narrative, or just their story is not part of the general narrative out there. And so in various ways they resort to action, that speaks louder than their words. And so for me, when I look at poetry and the refugee situation, I first and foremost, I think it is important that the refugee gets the opportunity to tell their story through art, because again, with art, okay, let me be specific and say through poetry, because poetry first and foremost is by virtue of it being poetry. I call poetry for me a memory disc. It's the disc. Through poetry we document our stories. Through poetry we are able to prove that we actually lived. Because when you write a poem or when you compose a poem and you share it, whatever it is saying, it is an affirmation first and foremost that you existed. A poem, a human expression cannot just come out of air. And so for me, just by virtue of the fact that the refugee has decided to create a poem is already a counter narrative, to what has already been established. And for me, which is to say, if I create a poem, I existed, regardless of the circumstances. I lived, and one day, somehow, somewhere, someone will listen to it, someone will read it, someone will watch it, whatever medium that you decide to share it. By virtue of the fact that it exists, it means that you have beaten the odds of afterlife, And so for me, it is important because first and foremost, it is an affirmation that you existed, and then secondly, through poetry, we can get to share our experiences, our pains, our joys, our lessons with life, in life, with our communities, our various communities, and through poetry, using language and using poetry to tell my story, it allows, because poetry is dressed down talk, yeah, and so it commands the audience to listen, where Rashida talks about a drum, because of its rhythm, it will command you to move. So it commands what's it called, mobility, to shake, and what the poem demands your ear to pay attention. And so for me, again, like I said, one of the challenges that I find, for the refugee situation is the inability of people being heard. And so what poetry does is that it equalizes that space. So when you start speaking poetry, you have the same power as the Secretary General of United Nations, as the president of the country where you're residing or the country where you're coming from. It equalizes. It just creates a ground level for everyone to be able to have their voices heard and respected. It doesn't matter whether you are experienced. What matters, what is most important when it comes to poetry is that you have a story to tell and you have a message to put out there. It doesn't matter whether you're 5 years old or you're 15 years old or you're 55 or you're 75. The most important thing is that liberty to want to say things. And so that makes poetry arguably one of the best ways that we can help refugees integrate. Like I said, for me, the moment you mention poetry, you're asking the auditory senses, to give you attention. Where else are you going to find that? And so for me, that's very important. The refugees, to have their voices to be heard, or their words to be out there in their communities where we want to understand because I was part of the host community. So if we're going to understand who they are, what their stories are, where they have come from, it is important we listen to them. And I can attest that after I was part of the Cultural Avenue project, my attitude towards the refugee situation and condition absolutely changed. Because I went before. I'd never been to a refugee camp before. I went and I lived there. I was able to listen to their poetry. I was able to empathize with them. I was able to realize that, these are people with talents. And the only thing that they needed were our auditory senses for us to realize that, there is a lot that they can offer to our community and to our world at large. So, yeah.
All right, so that's a very all-encompassing response. There's a lot that you just put into that particular reply, and we've kind of gotten to the halfway marker of this particular panel. So what I do want to do is just again sort of refresh, reintroduce you guys, and then I start throwing individual questions. Yeah, so again, for those of you who've joined us through YouTube Live, I do have on the panel with me Rashida Namulondo, who is a Ugandan-based actress, a stage director, and award-winning poet. She's the triple threat. She happens to be the founder of the Sophie Mwanika Institute of Art for Change. It's a non-profit organization that uses theater for building. And the man we just heard speak, it happens to be Kagai Ngobi. He is the founding editor of Kitara Nation Poetry Series. You heard him just passionately make a case for poetry. He has authored 4 poetry collections, including the popular The Headline That Morning and other poems. He enjoys performing poems and plays and lives in Kampala. I also have Nyende Keith, who serves as the team and projects coordinator at the Cultural Avenue. Now, the Cultural Avenue is a platform that leverages cultural expressions and platforms to contribute to peace building and sustaining peace. So these 3 panelists are people within the arts that have come in contact with refugees, and it's just interesting hearing this conversation from them. I think at this point, I want to go to Nyende. Nyende, do you think that arts for refugees is filling a gap that politicians have failed to meet?
I mean, for starters, the refugee situation is as a result of failure of our politics. So if we just start there, then we see our. I'm so sorry, Stephanie wants to join in.
No trouble. Hi, Stefan.
But if we speak of filling a gap, I mean, one of the things that you brought up in the beginning when you were speaking, you were asking why, say, aid organizations or people who, I don't want to say who help us with money. I have my own my own thinking about that whole, donor community, people who give us money, why they should, if they are thinking of to allocate money, should they give money to people that to refugees for food, or they should give it to, artistic enterprises like this? Like what is really their role? And again, it's not that the politics itself has failed, but again, if we are talking about politics, or rather poetry in itself, it communicates a lot of politics anyway. So if it's filling a gap, it already does that by the nature of what it is. Again, at some point I'll accuse, or I'll say something that I've heard before, people who think that poetry is elitist, poets communicate to fellow poets. It's not really a layman's language. And I'm waiting to hear what Rashida and Kagai want to say about that. But again, for me, I'm again thinking about how they manage, when we worked with them, how they manage to just get these young people to speak out, to just get these young people to connect, to just get these young people. There's been talk about telling stories, but there are also stories that they have told that the politicians or the people who practice politics begin to pick up, So for me, if it's a gap, of course I can't say that, I don't want to be one of those people who give a lot of power to things beyond the power that they possess. I don't want to say, oh, well, art is so powerful, it's the most important thing in the world. Without art, I don't want to be one of those people, but I mean, the contribution that it has, the contribution that it can potentially have is something that we should, again, continue to think about. I want to again go back to why we thought art is a good channel to try and get refugees and host communities to engage. First of all, it's less competitive. Art in itself is, of course, it can be competitive. If I see a refugee, I'm part of the host community, then I see a refugee who is competing for the same space for me and is probably going to take the space from me. Of course, it's commercialized. At some point it will be commercialized, and anything that gets into the commercial arena, there's always that competition, tensions rise, but still in its nature, it creates this environment where people can relate without exactly feeling very, very competitive. The competition always comes, either when you want to be when you want to be commercially successful, or again, depending on why people do what they do or why they do the art. But in this particular case, again, I want to go back to the question that you asked, if there is anything particular, or if art is filling a gap that politics hasn't, or I'm not sure. That's the question you asked, right?
Yeah, that is.
It's not just contributing to filling up some of these gaps, right? It's also opening politics to possibilities of other ways of engaging with some of the issues that they struggle with. For example, I know for a fact that Kagai has this young woman who has printed a really, really good book. I hope we get a chance to talk about her. I'm not sure when that book is coming out. I really would love to hear the themes that young woman has brought out. You will have, of course, politicians sit somewhere flashy hotel, of course, we can't blame them. That's just the way the system has tuned them to behave. It's okay. Sitting somewhere talking, it's a lot of talking now. This is a young woman who didn't have a lot of resources at his disposal, gets into I don't know, Peter's entity. All of a sudden she has all these stories that she's sharing, you know. Now I want to think about her as some sort of political activist in the camp. How much impact would she have? Again, I'm just thinking how much audience would she have at her disposal? Not at her disposal, at her disposal. Sorry, English is a foreign language to me. How much would she have?
No trouble.
If she was an activist, say in the camp, I'm thinking the people she will be speaking to, fellow refugees, and among the refugees she will be speaking to would be probably refugees of her own country. But now here she has a larger audience to communicate, and the themes that she's tackling are not just themes that concern refugees only. These are universal themes. So I don't want to say that the art is filling up a gap that politics has failed, but definitely the contribution that it can play is really tremendous. I would like to think. I don't know what my colleagues think.
All right, let's go to Rashida. So Rashida, considering everything that Nyende has just said, obviously the arts are a force to reckon with. And there's something about the status quo that we say, that it's better to go with what you know than what you don't know. And when it comes to politics and governance, they keep, pushing that the status quo, at least we know what it's like, we know what we can do. So if we're considering what Nyende just said, do you think that the arts are dangerous?
Oh, okay. That's I'm just gonna say this. Yes, they are at one point. I mean, like everything is a dangerous thing, right? I mean, even eating a lot of chocolates is dangerous. So yes, I will say that. And before I reflect more on that, I also want to contribute something a little more on what Nyende just said about if arts are filling the gap. And I think as we proceed on this conversation and more, we need to really think more of process versus product. And I'm going to answer about the product and if we think that art is dangerous. But in terms of filling the gap, we need to think of process and the ability or the possibility of what art could contribute. And just saying this is like, if you look at artists, they always cluster. They always form groups. And it's so hard. I don't know any artist who's made art individually. And when people make groups, we already know that we need groups to push governance, to push activism, right? And what I noticed in many communities, especially the refugee communities, is that groups of artists did what I like to call local responsibility or local leadership. They checked on themselves. They made sure that they check each other's behavior. They make sure that they pick representatives, to voice for them. So art does have that ability to feel, like politics space. Like what do they need, and what is the governance like in the camps? And they'll be able to do this because then they're in cliques and responsible for each other in each clique. And so they can check themselves. They can check the crime rate. They can check, all these things because they do want the best for each clique. So I just wanted to put that and look at more of the process and what more art can do. Even versus just politics. There is skilling, there's improving literacy levels and a lot of those things. Now going back to, do we think that art is dangerous? And now that we're speaking in the refugee space, I would say yes and no. And I think for me is that we're talking about people who've come from different places, right? They're here because of really bad politics, They're already here because of bad politics. So either way, art and refugee spaces cannot be separated from politics anyway, because that's why they're here already, bad politics. So I think the question is, and this goes to responsibility of the artist, of the kind of And it also depends because art has genres. If you're going nonfiction, then it all goes back about how true is your story, have you checked it, are your facts right? And of course, you also have things of like, for example, if you work with refugees, putting out their photos or putting them like, if they're in a group and they've done a film, putting that out in the film, it could be a potential risk, both for the person, that is the person involved in the product, the refugee, because we do not know the people that are in the camp. You could expose them to somebody who's looking for them. That all those kind of things, especially for them when they're recording and putting out their work on social media and their product. And so I like to look at the risk in terms of the artists, the refugee artists themselves are putting out their work and how people perceive the product. I think that in Uganda, we're okay. I don't see if maybe a refugee would put out a product in Uganda particularly, and that would get them in trouble with the Ugandan space. But maybe it would get them in trouble with their home country, or I don't know, all the people in that space, because when we're in the refugee space, we still have those little nuances. So maybe it could get them in trouble in that space if they do maybe have a political thing or a political piece. I don't really think that the art is dangerous for anybody, well, especially if it's political. But for the refugees, I think it's more sensitive in terms of their identity, in terms of where do they share these platforms, and how true is this story? How true is this story if it's a non-fiction? Do you have your data right? Have you done the double check? Have you cross-checked? Because you could potentially spark a war, I think, if the story is not right. So for them, it's also a more delicate space. It's a more delicate space when we come to producing the work. I'm insisting on producing, because if somebody is in the camp and just creating work, I don't think that would really create a lot of trouble. Maybe unless they're dissing each other, or because they also have these clusters. If maybe they create art and it's attacking camp B or camp C, and maybe they'll get into trouble. But if it comes to now that they're out and the stuff and the work that we try to do, or the work that Culture Haven tries to do, and I'm so privileged to be part of this project, that at one point X, we want the artists to be picked by producers, by international artists. And then it goes to think, how are they going to travel? Is it safe to produce, their names and write their true names on this work? Is it safe for them? All these things you have to consider them. And then that makes it risky for them. That overall, I think there's also ways to mitigate this risk. It's not like 100%. I think it's like 15% chance. I don't know. That's what I think, 15% in terms of risk. But overall, I think it's safe.
Hello?
Hello.
All right, so I seem to have been booted out, but I'd like to believe that we caught the tail end of your comment.
I think so.
All right, fantastic. Forgive me. So I'm seeing that we've got roughly 12 minutes to go. I want to throw Kagai a last question, then we can do one question each just before we wrap up the panel, because I do want us to stick to time and make sure we're done just as we're hitting 7 o'clock. So Kagai, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
All right, fantastic. Earlier, Nyende was referring to one of the girls at the refugee camp that you've had some contact with, and I also had Rashida speaking to some of the challenges that refugees face, and she mostly spoke about the social-political challenges. But as an artist, as a creative, do refugees face the same sort of challenges that the rest of us would face, like writers? Would you say, what's the most inspiring piece of art that a refugee has shared with you that you've had the experience of coming in contact with?
Thank you, Nabila. Okay, yes, I think the artists in refugee spaces face the same challenges as artists even in the host communities, because like I think it's Nyende who said it. Art is a rare expressive arts a rarity. You know, in our societies, they are normally reserved for traditional ceremonies. You know, so you're only comfortable to be called a poet at a wedding ceremony, at a burial, or something like that. It's not something that, nobody wakes up in the morning and they say, I want to listen to a poet, and it doesn't matter whether you're in a refugee space or in a host community. It's so some of the challenges pertaining as to the attitude cut across. Now to the question of the interesting piece that there are quite a number. There are quite a number. Allow me briefly to just give a context. For me, the context is I had never been to a refugee camp before. I'd never been to a refugee, whether settlement or temporary. I had never been. The closest I had associated with the refugee situation in my country was what I see on television and hear on radio and I read about in the newspapers, And so for me, the poetry that I encountered that really moved me was as a result of me having an opportunity to learn more about the refugee situation and also to encounter new forms of poetic expressions. So there is a poem. There's a girl called Asha Divine Patangila, who is a refugee from Congo, wrote. Actually, it was one word. She wrote it in her book. And this was about 3 years ago when I first met her. And it is what we used to make her title. It's what we used as a title for her poetry book that we shall soon be releasing. And it's entitled Decountryized. She had written this word in the middle of her writing book, decountryized. And so I asked her, what does this mean to you? And she told me, Peter, I feel like, I was born in another country. I grew up in another country. Since I grew up, we've just been running. We've been on the. In fact, she's leaving Uganda in the next few days, to go to the US, for her further studies. And now we have to edit. One of the reasons why the book is not out is because her travels were confirmed, and now we have to edit her profile. Because now it can't read that she currently lives in Kampala anymore, as it has been for the past 5-6 years. And so she wrote up, then I asked her to write a series of poems that were talking about her situation. And so and then she wrote amazing poems about where she grew up, how they have been on the run, how she feels when she walks in public spaces in Kampala and people notice that she is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, the stereotypes that they throw at her, how she cries when she goes to the toilet, how she reveals how she talks to her parents about their family tree and the past, and in her poems capture the pain that her parents feel at the inability of wanting to share that painful history with her. There's a beautiful poem she writes that is entitled The Color of Grass, about this little girl who is just pestering her mother to tell her, but what was the color of this grass where we grew up? And then she talks about the pity party. There's a poem she writes about called The Pity Party, where I think she talks about this event that she attended, and her faces, their faces were plastered on walls, and it was a fundraising event, and she felt that she was being used by the world. It's rich. And for me, like I said, the most important thing is, having, the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi talks about the danger of a single story. And she cautions us as readers and writers to be aware of creating narratives that are singular. So for me, my media, the media that I consume, had created a single story for me about who a refugee is and how they are victimized. Now, working with the poets in the refugee spaces that we've worked with, working with this young lady, trying to publish her for the past 24 months, it's been eye-opening, and there are quite a number. There's another poet called, briefly, sorry, there's another poet called Songa.
Yeah, can I?
Yes, time.
Yeah,
So
very quickly, I want us to wrap
yes.
up. Yeah, go on.
Yes. So there's a poet called Songa Bahati. He's from also DRC. He was one of the young poets that we worked with. This just last week, his poem has been nominated to as one of the best poems of the year in Uganda. And so and it's a poem that he wrote during that time that's called "I Still Stand." And so watching these things happen really makes us happy.
Thank you, Kurai. I mean, time won't let us, but it's really lovely hearing what you're saying, just knowing firsthand, but in our case, secondhand. And I see that we've only got 5 minutes to go. So let's use a minute for the last set of questions. Everyone will get a minute each. Let's go to Nyende. Nyende, what impact would you like to see through the arts? What kind of impacts do you want to see from the arts? Just 1 minute. Hello, Nyende.
Aside from the impact that I would like to see, I'm thinking more of how I would rather speak about how I feel people should take the art seriously, invest a little bit of more time and resources in the arts and what it's trying to do. They should realize that art is an intervention. It's not just something that communicates intervention. These interventions that we speak about, peace building, Rashida, for example, what Rashida does, what the Peters do, these entities, people should take them seriously. People should allocate resources to them, and they'll reap the benefits. What you're calling the impact, because how do we use the arts? How are we using the art? Because we can't always wait to reap benefits out of where we are not investing. And I feel like one of the sectors that people don't really take seriously and are not taking time to invest in is the arts. And because they don't do that, they don't see the benefits. The little that people have been able to do, even without those investments, should be showing them what they could potentially do. In my mind, people should take art seriously and invest time and resources in entities that are trying to cause positive change using the arts. They will see the impacts then.
Thank you, Nyende. Thank you. Much appreciated. Question, just a minute. How do you think women, refugee girls and women through?
Adam?
Yeah, so in just a minute, how do you think, what's the best way to empower girls and women, refugee girls and women in the arts, through the arts?
I think for me, I would say, well, the challenges of girls is also really different from the challenges of boys. And we've seen this with our work. Girls have to stay home and help. And with the work, they have siblings, they have to collect food. And I think for me, it's just really differentiating the programs that go to the girls. And I mean, because sometimes when we have programs, it's like, general programs, and we don't do the research to know what times are girls free, what times are they able to come. We just concluded a program, and this was really thoughtful. We really had to plan around the woman. So we researched, when is the woman free? And when we did realize this, we just ran a program in the time when actually the women are free, and we had more numbers coming in. Because there's always been a problem. It's not just only the arts, like girls are more taken up, especially in spaces like this, and they cannot come when we run regular programs, let's say from 9 to 5, because then they have to help out. But just differentiating and really being thoughtful about the process and the timing. And then I go back again and add on Kate's voice, also really institutionalizing these interventions, because art has been turned into edutainment. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but if we think that art is just the end product of like, oh, we did this, you know, community, I don't know, mobilization. Now we have some entertainers, you know, then it does not really make the impact. And especially when we come to girls, it does not really make the impact that we need them to. So if we generally look at it as an intervention, as a process, as a methodology, and build the institutionalization, because girls can spare time to go to school. They can sometimes. But also that goes back, like, if we can build institutions that support these systems and really think about the girl and what time she's available and do interventions in that space for her, then it's possible that they can be involved and fully involved in these programs.
All right. So, I mean, we're completely out of time. I really wanted to get a last comment from Kagai. So what I will do is, because I know that the YouTube live is on a timer, for those of you who've been with us, I'm sure you've enjoyed this fantastic panel, hearing from all three participants. I just want to let you know very quickly that the next panel will be starting. That's Nakivale Refugee Settlement. That's the title, Barua, a Letter in Swahili. And right on the heels, by 8 p.m. Nigerian time, which is 10 p.m. Kenyan time and 9 p.m. Rwandan time, there'll be an introduction of the panel of judges. Just imploring you to stay with us. This is, again, the second day of On the Wings of Technology International Poetry Festival. This panel just gives you a taste of what it is that, you know, the rest of the day has in store for you. So a big thank you to you for joining us on this. I believe at this point, I'll simply hand back to Andrea so we just wrap up. And a big thank you to you guys, Rashida, Yende, and Kagai. Thank you so much. Really appreciate hearing from you guys.
Thank you too. Thank you too. Thank you too.
Fantastic.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys.